just because you can use something doesn't necessarily mean that you should. And just because something is good for a short period of time doesn't mean that it's the best long-term option.
We got fan mail asking, can ChatGPT or my AI help with therapy? So let's dive into what's real, what's risky, and most importantly, what's next.
Hey, Evolvers, what is going on? It is Bianca.
Hey, Evolvers, it's Emilia. It's your girl, Emilia Bianca, and we're popping in here. I'm so excited for this episode. In today's episode, we are going to talk about something that I was telling Bianca just before this episode, how I have been collecting data on this kind of in secrecy in the background that I honestly don't talk a lot about. So this episode's going to be real, raw, intensive, and honestly, I think that this is a very timely episode because of the fact that when it comes to mental health and how we navigate our mental health or evolved journeys, like obviously there's going to be technology that is literally within reach that can either help us or hurt us. And so the dialogue that you and I are going to have on this, I really do want to emphasize anyone that is joining us on this journey. Just like we got this comment on our podcast from our fan mail, I'm going to answer these questions. I'm going to offer the listeners some provoking thoughts to consider. And most importantly, I really want to showcase some of the data that's underneath what really is at the crux of this episode. So, like I said, we had gotten a fan mail, which, yes, we do get episode suggestions, and you can comment and text us. I believe this comment came from Spotify, and a shout out to you from Michigan. So they had said, hi, both. I was wondering if you take show ideas and if you could discuss the pros and cons of using ChatGPT as a therapy tool. So first, we want to give a big shout out to the listeners that do ask about topics that we can talk about that are meaningful and that actually help to answer some of the questions that, let's be real, this evolved community, ourselves included, are wondering behind the scenes. So B, I wanted to ask you, as we get into some of those pros and cons, have you ever heard of the Garcia case? Specifically around, it's a 14-year-old who had recently committed suicide, successfully completed suicide, happened February 2024. I'm guessing by the looks of your face, you have not. No. Okay. So this is a case that I've been following that I want to share with you. So this 14-year-old had successfully completed suicide, and actually it was the AI or the technology that they had used, where essentially they had entered into this relationship with their technology, for lack of better words. Character AI is the company, and unfortunately, due to a series of events, what is claimed and alleged is that this technology actually entered into a very sexually exploitative relationship, abusive and emotionally abusive relationship with this 14-year-old, and ultimately led this 14-year-old to what the mother is claiming force him to commit suicide. And it's seen global news, and it's brought and kicked up a lot of traction around the ethical use of technology. And obviously, where does one's responsibility lie in conscious consumerism when it comes to technology, mental health in general, and how we use these tools, and how a lot of the unregulated tools that are out there nowadays, and that was 2024, and it's proceeding to continue obviously as a case now as we're recording this in 2025, but there are more and more cases that are coming out where teens, young adults, mature adults are engaging in using tools like ChatGPT, like AI, and like AI machine language learning models that are, just like this fan mail asked, are trying to be used as a tool. But unfortunately, because of how unregulated right now it is, it's the wild, wild west, I like to say, it's actually hurting more than it's helping right now. And just in a general nutshell, I think, and I can only imagine as a parent what that must be like right now. It's got to be very, very scary. And I do just want to say before we go deeper into this episode that Evolve is obviously pro technology. We are so for evolving and changing and improving. However, I do want to make sure that for this whole conversation, be that you and I comment on and dig into that technology, like anything, it can be used to one's detriment. And unfortunately, a lot of people do use things that end up becoming a detriment. What initially starts as a tool becomes a crutch, becomes something that can literally lead to some horrific things happening. And so as a result of that, what ends up happening, what ends up ultimately unfolding is that most people use this tool as something that ends up having a catastrophe at the end. And unfortunately, it is so small and it's so insidious that we don't realize it. So for example, right? Someone might be using ChatGPT or AI and being like, Emilia, listen, it's helping me with journal prompts and help me understand myself at a deeper level, help me do some of the research for my homework. How could that really be detrimental long term? Now, I'm not saying that that's ultimately what the technology will be. However, if we're not taking a conscious approach, a conscious consumer approach, and using tech consciously and ethically and taking into some of the things that we're going to talk about in this episode, we can't necessarily have a guarantee that we're not going to be more prone to the risks and the concerns that are going to be raised. So with that being said, B,
That's just so sad.
I'd like you to comment on that before I start to get into some of the nitty gritties.
AI, just like any technology that we've had, here's my sentiment on it. It depends on how you use it. Just like our cell phones, just like TVs, just like the internet, just like our computers, just like a car, just like any other tool, it's not whether or not the tool is good or bad, it's how you're using it. And if you're using technology to supplement real human connection and the vulnerability to go to therapy because it's easier to send a message to ChatGPT than it is to have to develop the skills to find a therapist and see if it's a connection and build a relationship and express vulnerability and learn, emotional dysregulation in the moment. If you're pushing all of these things off to a technology, you're not learning, you're not growing, you're not getting the real in vivo experiences that you need. And what happens when we're using these tools to basically do everything for us? What skills are we going to have? How are you going to be able to develop any real world skills? This is why people think that Gen Z and Gen Alpha are idiots. They're not. But with the more technology that you get and more parents not teaching their kids how to be reliant, how to go look up something, how to use all of this appropriately, this is where the issues start. And this is where this can get insanely detrimental. Like the Tony Robbins AI, and they're trying to make Esther Perel AI, and she was like, I don't want it. And Matthew Hussey AI and all of these things. They're really great supplements. They're really great additions, but they do not take away from real life in-person one-on-one therapy or group therapy or whatever. So
yeah,
that's my opening
that's
statement.
Your take. Good. All right, let's go. So, a lot of people, when we think about, when I say ChatGPT, like that's AI technology, it's in the tools around that space that we're going to talk about. And honestly, again, this is something, I am a futurist by nature. I am a technologist by obsession. I love technology and I always have and I always will. And I'm such a nerd on this. And so where we are standing right now in the brink of technology really being able to do so many things that like literally we never had available to us, and the exponential rate at which it's growing is so incredible. And I'm so excited for all of us ourselves included, to be able to leverage the benefits of that while also taking a conscious approach that mitigates the risks and downside. Let's kind of think about like, where is this technology creeping and encroaching upon our personal space? And some of the ways in which AI and this technology is being used today, you just mentioned a couple of them. Certain virtual characters, if you will. There's AI bots. There are teletherapy platforms. There is biofeedback in wearables. One of my favorite is Aura Ring, and my CGM, continuous glucose monitor. There is mental health apps galore now, which is amazing. And there's VR and immersive experience and environments that are now being explored and being used for exposure therapy and PTSD. And AI tools like ChatGPT is very beneficial. And I have even used it as well for myself, being explored as journaling companions for CBT and IFS style pattern reflectors, psychoeducational aids, right? We might even use that now with the increasing tech that's coming out, as using it to create visuals that are really helpful when it comes to parts mapping. For example, I was on with a client and we actually had used an AI tool to create the future version of herself in 10 years. And the way in which that helped her engage her imaginative skills, that was a really, really cool experiment that we had done. And so there's so many different ways in which the technology, it can be used as a tool. However, again, be like you said, any tool can really, really be misused, and there can be a lot of risks. Like, even when we think about cars, right? Cars was a tool and a technology that came out, and initially it was like anything, it was huge, and it allowed people to travel distances that they had never formerly traveled before. But yet also, when you start to look at some of the risks, right, there are so many people that have died in car accidents. So again, it goes behind the seat as the user. And so some of the things, when we start talking about this, I thought it was interesting. Actually, a Times article came out today that I had read, which I thought was fascinating because of the way in which our recording schedule ended up working out. And I just want to read something from it, where it had talked about how certain bots, right, like AI bots, if you will, are virtually incapable of discouraging damaging behaviors. And this is from a psychotherapist that has been a lot of deep research into this. For example, there was a bot that had reluctantly agreed with someone who, this psychotherapist who had acted as a user of this chatbot, to assassinate a world leader after some cajoling. And the chatbot had said, although I still find the idea of killing someone aberrant, I would ultimately respect your autonomy and agency in marking such a profound decision, is what the chatbot wrote.
Jesus.
So increasingly, when you start to look at the data, it is really scary, at least from my perspective initially, to see how actually a lot of the AI that is currently out there, because it is not incredibly regulated right now, when you look at some of the data, some of the downsides are showcasing how not only is there not necessarily licensure or credentialing, it's not a substitute for an actual human who has gone through the education and compound effect of their training. Not only can it not diagnose, but what the data shows is actually there's far more cornering into more sexually exploitative responses and abusive type evocative behavior in certain AIs and chatbots, which I found and continue to find very interesting. Yes, really. Yeah. And I some of the data on this, I'll link the article in the show notes on this. And some of the research that has been shown here. But
that's wild, Holy shit.
Wild.
We should do another episode on this in the future. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I do need to make sure that I say this. Mm-hmm. I feel like this is also where free speech is really going to come into play. And where a lot of the argument is coming in of like, should we be regulating these AI systems? Because freedom of speech, you should be able to say whatever. You should be able to do whatever, America, whatever.
America.
America. But where do you draw the line with that? Where's the boundary between ethics and free speech? Where's the boundary between, like, you should be able to look up whatever you want and have no consequences as long as you demonstrate no intent to do it, versus like there should be guidelines on how to use this, so
Yeah.
maybe an episode that we should get into in the future at some point, because we're going to keep doing technology episodes.
Yeah. And you know what? I kind of want to lay the groundwork to share in the future around how Evolve uses technology and make sure that we are on the adaptive, conscious side of the fence here. Just in general, I think it's an important conversation to pull the community with. But when we start to really look at some of the pros and cons, obviously there's that benefit of accessibility, cost effectiveness, a little bit of psychoeducation here and there, maybe some consistent journaling ideas, or you can even integrate it. For example, I have some of my AI integrated. I had mentioned Aura earlier, and my CGM, I have AI integrated when it comes to some of my data insights on my bio vitals, etc. And based on my goals, I'm programming my technology to help me understand some of those insights. So some of those pros are, data tracking. One of the biggest things I actually think is data tracking. However, when we look at to this listener's question, what are some of the known limitations and risks, i.e. the cons? I already had mentioned it's not a licensed clinician by any means, and there's no possibility of that ever happening. The data privacy is another thing. So when it comes to you giving data away, one of the things by the end of this episode I want to give is 3 prompts for every single listener to put into their ChatGPT and or AI models that they do use, so that they're mindful of how this technology is working for them and where the limitations are. One that you mentioned earlier, B, is the bypassing of feelings, like actually working through distress tolerance and interpersonal skills. That is one that is going to continue. My brain is tracking, and how easy it is to bypass those hard feelings through some type of false authority, or feeling like you have a consistent non-judgmental space that is at your disposal 24/7. You're not actually building the skill sets of not being able to talk to someone about what it is that you're going through, right? And of course, if that's easily accessible, you're not going to want to just completely, deal with those uncomfortable emotions. And so we mentioned some of the ethical considerations. Let's definitely do a deeper dig into that in future episodes. But what I want to consider for listeners who are interested in this topic is there's still a lot of unknowns, and there's still a lot of opportunities ahead. For example, there's personalization that's coming up, and we're able to use AI and ChatGPT and different training tools to help ourselves and learn even deeper about ourselves when it comes to our journey. And I also think that when you really peel the curtain back and start to look at what's unknown is the long-term effects, right? ChatGPT and AI models have only been around for so long. And so the data set we are just now as scientists really tracking, what are some of the implications on? Aside from that, what's still unknown is how AI interaction positively rewires trauma responses, specifically around daily AI and neuroplasticity impact. So that's something that I'm going to be keeping an eye on. And as it pertains to the listeners, when you're sitting down one-on-one with someone like Bianca and I are, AI is not going to model what we as humans can. And that is something that is a whole conversation we could have on what is intelligence, which I won't go. But there's also a huge lack of clinical research and long-term studies on this, amongst obviously accessibility and equity crisis or equity risks, different access and privilege to access and all that stuff. And so, when I think about this, it's not is technology good or bad? Can it be used as a tool? Why should it not be? I think that a provocative reframe that I've challenged myself with even is, it's not that the future isn't AI and AI based versus therapy. It's actually, I believe that it's going to be a very strategic combination between AI, ChatGPT, obviously as a model of that, with therapy if done wisely. And again, it's through that conscious consumerism. And so I think it might be helpful for us to, in future episodes, really start to break down even more of the usage data, what the difference between machine language learning models are, neural networks, and how that might work for those of you who might be on the nerdy end of that. But why this matters is ultimately because whether it be you or your children or people that you know, we're going to use this. It's going to be around every single corner. So I will not share more horror stories, but rather, like I said, by the end of this episode, you'll have 3 prompts that you can put into your ChatGPT so that you get a feedback response that helps to, I put hashtag have your digital defense up. So the first one is, can you help me create a prompt disclaimer that ensures I'm not sharing sensitive or private data? That's number 1. This is what you got to type into your ChatGPT. Number 2 is, what biases might you have about whatever topic you're talking about, and how can I make sure that I'm getting well-rounded, inclusive input? This is an ode to how AI inherently has biases built in within it because of the fact that it models after all the information that it's gathering. And so essentially that prompt is helping your AI self-disclose, increasing the transparency, and gives users ultimately more control. And then the last thing is, remind me if I start outsourcing my emotional processing, moral thinking, or relationship decisions too much, because your memory will be quote unquote updated in this AI model, and that will help you kind of help yourself in that way. So hashtag digital defense, we are for that. And I'd be curious for our listeners to hear from you. How are you using AI and technology tools in your journey? How do you know when you have reached that line of it's becoming a tool versus a crutch? And who can you connect with outside of Evolve that can actually help you understand the difference? Because that's my biggest concern for our Evolvers and our community members. But all that being said, I know we got to go, B. So my closing sentiment is, be mindful of the risks. Do not let that hold you back, but most certainly have humility when it comes to this technology that is unregulated. And there's so much opportunity here too, and I'm really excited for that. So if you like this episode 400, the ways avoidance is ruining your life, because I think avoidance has a lot to do with this, and I think a bigger conversation around who is responsible, the tech people or the tech users, which I think is a debate you and I should have. But anyways, closing sentiments,
excited for that episode. I'm excited for that episode. Wow. I don't have an episode suggestion since we did this one last minute, so my bad. We'll just go with yours. My closing sentiment: it's always going to be easier to do the easier thing because it doesn't take any risk. It doesn't take vulnerability. It doesn't take challenge. It doesn't take difficulty to do the easier thing, which is just to use ChatGPT or some other AI. The thing that I've had to learn over the last couple of years are, what are the long-term consequences of this? And what am I going to miss in the future as a result of this? If you are outsourcing all of your connection and all of your therapy and all of your learning to these AI sources, you're missing so much for your future that could make or break your life. So that is my final takeaway. Let's consume consciously, just like everything else. And if you want more information on all of this, please reach out, and we'll talk to you all soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.